Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's Denise from Dobby Books. Long time no see. I feel like I've missed hanging out with a group of friends that I can just, we go to a certain place and enjoy a glass of wine and yak about books late into the night. I mean, what a joy, what a pleasure that would be. And I feel like I'm missing something like that, a connection like that. So I'm very happy to be back with you guys. And just to let you know, I have these big spaces in between recordings because my work schedule has been very, what's the word? It's been very varied, but for example, starting tomorrow, I'm working 6 days straight, and then I'll have days off. And on another week, I just work 3 or 4 days. So it's been back and forth with my schedule, and I've just simply had to work with it. So today, being Tuesday, I have a day off, so I have time to do a little catching up and to give you a quick book review on a book that I just finished, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the one that I'm currently reading, but I have to go get it, so hold on. So first, let's start with the book that I have finished reading, and it's The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhan. This I read for my in-person book group and will be meeting in a week or two to discuss it. I finished it super early because it was one of those books I just could not put down. It's based on a real live person that lived back in the 18th century when America was still a colony and into the time where we had established our independence from Britain and we're now this brand new country, but we still really hadn't hammered everything out yet. So it was sort of that early American republic still. And the name of the midwife is Martha Ballard. She was an actual midwife during 18th century America, and she was in Maine, the state of Maine. And the story opens with her. She has a delivery, and not long after that delivery, someone has come to the home where she's at on horseback and asked her to please come with them, that a body has been found in the river and they need someone to look at it. And because Martha many times is the only medical person in town, she's often turned to for things other than just birthing. So she goes to look at this body, and in examining it, she can see evidence of a beating and a hanging before his body was thrown into the river. And she states this to the person who had called her, some officials there. Just as she finishes her examination and her conclusion, a new doctor, I guess he's replacing one that was there occasionally, very cocky, very arrogant, tells her to get out of the way because he's a real doctor and he's going to examine the body and decide what the cause of death is. And she just kind of goes, just kind of rolls her eyes and thinks, how many of these do we have to deal with? He comes to the conclusion later on that his death was an accident. So she immediately knows, okay, someone's covering something up. So the rest of the story is chapter by chapter, more of that story being fleshed out, and more information on Martha's life before she became a midwife, when she was dating her husband, when they first married, some difficult times in her life as a mother, as we move forward in that story. And real historical figures, names are brought up in the process. So I logged some of those down. So John Cohen is an important name, and Colonel Joseph North. Colonel Joseph North plays a key role in this because he's the one who continually tries to defy her and get in her way. So she knows there's a cover-up and it's linked to him. There really was a Colonel Joseph North who served in the army before we were a country, and then in the young country itself. He is accused of having raped a woman, and Martha went to go see this woman a few days after the rape. She saw the bruises, she saw the injuries, she attended to her, so she kept very careful records. And what ends up happening is the legal system. Then there was a local judge who was exactly the person accused of this rape, Joseph North. And then there was the one where you'd go to another town, a bigger town, and you'd have a second court hearing. And then there was the third bigger one, which was more of a superior court thing, a county. And then you'd have 2 or 3 judges come from the county or the state or whatever, would come to the area, either the original town or the bigger one that you had to go for the second trial. Martha shows up for each one of these. She testifies for each one of these. And what these other judges end up doing is reducing the charges against Joseph North, because he's a colonel after all. And of course, that's so much more important, isn't it? Also, Robert Treat Paine. Robert Paine, that last name is going to ring a bell for you. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he was also part of the Abolition Society. He is mentioned in that book. Nathan Cushing was the brother of William Cushing. William Cushing was a Supreme Court judge, and Nathan Cushing was the judge appointed by John Hancock. Increase Summer, Francis Dana, and Paul Revere are also mentioned in this book. And Paul apparently knows Martha and her husband, so they just call him Paul. We'll ask Paul. Paul will figure it out. Yeah, just talk to Paul. So I just thought that casual reference to Paul Revere was just pretty interesting. Also, let's see. I also wanted to mention on this. Oh, what's very interesting is she had, I believe, a total of 7 children, or 8, and she lost 3 of them. But you're going to find out as you read the book. She does have one son who is special. That's as much as I'm going to say, because I don't want to give too much away. But beside the fact that this son is very special, there's something else about his history that you probably won't catch till the end of the book, which is exactly what happened to me. I remember stopping at a certain point and going, wait a minute, wait, that doesn't make sense. And I had to go back, read a chapter here, read a chapter there, and try to make this connection, and finally the light bulb went off. And I just thought that was just the neatest thing, that this was another added mystery, added to the murder mystery itself. I thought it was very well put together. I thought Ariel did a good job of taking this piece and working with it, putting it aside, pulling in another one, and slowly we started to make those connections, except maybe 1 or 2 which she saved for last. The writing was just fantastic. It was one of those reads that was, the best way I can describe it is it was not a peaceful read, a calming read. The characters, Martha and her husband, what a wonderful husband Ariel Lawhon made Martha's husband. You think to yourself, if we could find more men just like this. It was just really realistic, yet just maybe in some ways not. It's debatable. I'm sure if a bunch of women got together and we were talking about this particular character, her husband, and forgive me, I'm not remembering his name right offhand, if discussing him, how realistic is he? What traits do you think could all these traits be in one person? And I'm sure we would come up with some very interesting conclusions. But he really was a character that I liked very much. Just fantastic, and how this couple really worked together as a couple, as parents, as people of the community. very much loved these characters. And in there, you also see she has adult children. So there's a little bit of romance blossoming, which just added a wonderful tenderness to it, and humor as well. There was humor. And I just love the fact that this, historical fiction just does a fantastic job. Of course, always depending on the writer as well, of pulling in reality and then just writing a story around it. She stayed as true as she could because some of the entries that Martha had were pretty brief. Martha, for example, here's one: Thursday, October 1st, clear except some showers. She always seemed to include the weather. We had company this afternoon. Mr. Savage here informs us that Mrs. Foster has sworn a rape on a number of men, among whom is Joseph North. Shocking indeed. I have been at home. And this apparently is a line that Martha Ballard used a lot in her diary. I have been at home. And I thought to myself, what would this have meant in the 18th century? A woman writing, I have been at home. What's the meaning behind that? That me, as of right now in the 21st century, might have a little trouble grasping, right? So that is something to think about. There was also, when she starts to, in her investigation, sometimes something that she saw, something that she heard that she hadn't paid attention to at the time that it was happening, floats to the surface, and she tries to grasp it before she loses it. And the way that the author describes Martha trying to grasp this thought is this, and I just thought it was fantastic. Ha, there it is, a glimmer. I grab hold of the tail end of the thought as it skitters by, then chase it so that it won't evaporate. I just love that image of a thought. I mean, how many of us have had that experience of we want to remember something and we can't quite write it down, and we're trying to find a way to just catch it by the tail so that we can hold on to it long enough until we can write it down. And that just really grasped it for me. This book was published by Vintage in the year, I'll get there, 2023. And other books that this author has written are The Wife, the Maid, and the Mistress, Flight of Dreams, I Was Anastasia, Code Name Helene, When We Had Wings. I've heard of that last one. So I love this new author, Ariel Lawhon, that I've just discovered through the book, The Frozen River. I think this is something that you all would enjoy if you like a little mystery, if you like a little suspense. This is fantastic. There's a climactic scene between Martha and North towards the end of the book. It just has you, you're not putting the book down at that point. It was fantastic. So The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon, historical fiction, fantastic. I loved it. All right. Now, the book that I'm still reading and working on as part of Historathon Quarter 2, as well as my Middle Ages study, is the Book of Marjorie Kemp. This is a story written by a priest, because you have to think, this is a woman from the Middle Ages in England. And many people in this time in history, the literacy rate, of course, was very low. So if someone needed to write a letter and have it sent, have a document written up, or something arrives to them and they can't read it, they'd have to hire someone to read it for them, or hire that same person to write it for them. So being a scribe was a business. And in this case, Marjorie Kemp was able to get a priest to write her story. Marjorie, when she would talk about, background. Marjorie was your average, hardworking Englishwoman, commoner. She had some money, but not a lot. And she describes her life as before not really being a very careful person, not really thinking of spiritual things, and she made a few mistakes. But then she turned her life around. She had a spiritual experience. And this is a record written by the priest about this woman's life. So it's all coming from his pen. So and he doesn't refer to her as Marjorie, but rather as this creature, and he doesn't mean it in a derogatory sense. Um, and when you think of, I've heard some terms in older Christian terms. We are a creature of God. You know, it's just it was a Christian term. This creature, perhaps a humble term. Once or twice, it does go into Marjorie telling something firsthand, so you know that he's dictating what she told him. Marjorie, of course, could not read, so any of the gospel stories that she learned, she had to have someone tell her, read to her, or share with her. This is, of course, why many of the medieval churches, you had all those paintings on the walls and what have you, because it had the biblical story. So the everyday people could learn those stories via the pictures. At this point, she has, this is what's interesting. And perhaps there's details here that I can't cover here, but Marjorie no longer wanted to have sex with her husband, and she talked it over with him. And she, I guess the experience for her was extremely unpleasant. I don't know, maybe he was completely insensitive to her as a human being. Maybe there was more to it that I don't know about. But this was one of her things that she really wanted her husband to agree with her on, that as part of her religious commitment, that he would allow her to make a vow of chastity. And if he was willing to cooperate with her in that. He eventually did. Now, this is something that was not uncommon in Christian practice. It even was part of practice in Old Testament times. And I'm trying to think of the book in the Old Testament. I believe it may be Leviticus, where it talks about if a woman wants to make a vow of chastity. Now, if she's a single girl, her father would have to be in agreement with that. If not, then that young woman was released from that vow. If she was a married woman and she wanted to make that vow, her husband would have to be in agreement with it. And if he wasn't, then the woman was released from that vow. And this carried forward into the ancient Christian church, where some of the ancient Jews in Christ's time, around the time of his birth, his conception, etc., had taken vows of chastity following that Jewish tradition. And this is a tradition that you'll hear brought up by the Catholic Church, explaining why Mary, Jesus' mother, was perpetual virgin, because she was one of these ancient Jews that had made this vow, and her husband was in agreement with her. More to that story, I won't get into it, but this was a very common practice in Judaism and in the early church, and then, of course, in the medieval times as well. And then after that, Marjorie is able to go on pilgrimage. She wants to make a pilgrimage, not just in England. Where would she go? Was it Canterbury yet? She went to the Way of Santiago, the Camino of Santiago. That's the same walk that I did in 2016. Fantastic. She did that pilgrimage, and you can imagine what it's like in the Middle Ages. There weren't a lot of accommodations. She was able to do that pilgrimage. She was able to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Can you imagine this in the Middle Ages? A woman essentially alone making this pilgrimage, which I just found fascinating. And it details her story, the companions she was originally with who did not treat her well, who abandoned her, but the good, kind people that she found along the way that helped her. So that's where I am so far. There are 2 books in this story. I'm in book 1 and I'm halfway through it. Book 2, I think, only has, how many chapters? I think 10 chapters, 15. Yeah, I think, nope, let me look. Yeah, book 2 only has 10 chapters, and book 1, I believe, has 80 chapters. They're not very long. If I show you the page that I'm on now, you can see they're fairly short chapters. So this looks like something I'll be able to read my way through. I'm glad I read this. I don't know if your average person who's unfamiliar with um, Christianity or Christian tradition would find this interesting. I don't know if it's something that I would recommend to them, because I think there are some ideas and concepts that they may not understand. So, for those who probably aren't terribly familiar with Christianity, maybe this is not a book that I would recommend. It is a biography. So let's leave it at that. For anyone who's familiar enough with Christianity, you can appreciate this and understand it a little bit better. All right. So the next one that I'm currently reading, I've only just started, and I only got so far, and you'll understand why in a minute, is by Dan Brown, Angels and Demons. It's the first of a series. I believe there's 5 books in the series, and the Da Vinci Code is book 2 in this series. This is book 1. So, of course, I'm going to read book 1 before I go to book 2. And this is where my little bookmark is. So I really have only just started. I've been really plowing into Marjorie Kemp. I took Marjorie Kemp with me when I had to go to the ER, when I was dealing with the issues with my esophagus. So, and then when I had to stay at the hospital overnight, that's what I did. I didn't watch TV. I read Marjorie Kemp. So that's what I've read most of so far. That's why I'm so much farther ahead in that book. Now that I've told you what I'm reading, let me tell you a couple of the books that I just got. One was the one that I was waiting for from eBay when I was reading Demon of Discontent. Where is that? The one that talked about the what was happening in the time just prior to the start of the Civil War. Demon of Unrest. That's what it was. And in that book, there was a person by the name of Mary Chestnut, who kept a very descriptive diary that she planned to have published later, in the later years. Of course, she didn't anticipate the Civil War. And then she died, I think, in her 50s or late 40s. So she never saw it published. It was then later, her writings were collected and published. There was an original publication, which I think I mentioned in my video the last time I brought this up, that was a short version of it. They took out the unpleasantries. Very much abridged, Then the later one came out, which included everything. And there has been a 3rd version published. I don't know much about that. I was looking for the one that was her complete diary. That's the one I wanted, and I was going to add that to my American History collection under bios, and I got it. Mary Chestnut's Civil War. It's huge, people. So it's nice and thick. And let's tell you how many pages it's got, minus the index, 836 pages. This one was published by Yale, and in 1981, the copyright's 1981. She was born 1823, died in 1886. So she was in her 60s when she died. Here is a picture of Mary Chestnut. So I'm very happy I have this book. It's going to go in this section here, which is the last thing I'm going to be showing you, because I finally finished organizing the big stuff in my library. What I still have to do is the children's section, which I ended up, I converted my closet into bookshelf space when I had to condense everything when we had people living in our guest room. And now that they're gone, I'm trying to just move everything back to where it was. But, of course, the problem is I've acquired so many books that I need new bookshelves. So there we are with that. Another book that I just got, and let's see if I can do this sitting on the floor so I can show it to you. This book meant a lot for me to get. Let's see. Yep, a little bit more. Don't know if you can see it. This book here. Now this section, which starts right around here, is the late Renaissance, early modern period. So it goes from 1600 to 1850. And it continues on down here. And what happened in the year 1830 is that a man by the name of Joseph Smith published a book called the Book of Mormon. That is in American history. I think it's the only American church founded in this country. Very interesting. Everyone else came from Europe or the Middle East, or all those other religions were imported. The Mormon church is the only one that's actually originated in the United States. So in that sense, it's significant. And what I was looking for, I used to have in this spot those blue covered ones that you'll get from missionaries. I had one of those in there. But I learned not too long ago that they had facsimiles of the original 1830 edition. And I got one. I found that on eBay, and I found it for a good price. And I think they tried to make it the original size that it was. And the original binding, the brown. And this is what it looked like here on the spine. And when it was originally published, it was written more like a story with chapters. Whereas when you look at the modern one, it's set up more like a Bible with verse numbers and everything. But the original one was not. And this one has, I think this was the original typeface on here, which was a message to the reader. All these things that I love to get in, older books and things like that are in this one. So this for me was a thrill. Yeah, that's all in, the original form. I just love that I got this. Let me get a standard paperback. I guess they had no paperbacks, and they had hardbound. I guess, yeah. Maybe Bibles were this big. Don't ask me. But I'm just thrilled that I finally got this book. And I can fill in this empty space that I had. And I can see from looking at this space, let me see, that around the time that the Book of Mormon was published, Frankenstein was published. Frankenstein was published in 1831, a year later. And just before that, The Last of the Mohicans was published. That was published in 1826. I just love this perspective. So when you look at the era that was going on over here, the Woman of Color, the Tale, the Federalist Papers, and over here, Tocqueville's Democracy in America. All that kind of within that, I would say 10-year range, 1820, 1830, Democracy in America. I didn't write the date. This was published in 1835, 5 years later. And there you go. When you see all that's happening in the United States at that time, that this book, the Book of Mormon, was published. Very excited. I don't know if I have another book. I think that was it. But what I'm going to also show all of you is the library. Okay, everyone. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the work that I did in my little library in the small room of my house, what I managed to clear up. And it's certainly not everything. I have a ton of other books that I've stashed in the next room that I've got to work on too. And when that's done, I guess I'll show you that one too. So this one, I started with my usual shelves. These were not the hardest. These two were pretty much organized already. As you can see, I didn't touch anything on the top of the shelves. Like the pictures of mom and dad and stuff, I have to find out what I'm going to do with those. They weren't the priority. So what I ended up doing is this top shelf is ancient Greece. That was pretty much the same. Below that is ancient Rome. I had maybe one book to add to that. The third one is Middle Ages to early Renaissance. All that shelf there is, I would say, early Middle Ages on the third shelf. That fourth shelf, that is Middle Ages, and then we start late Renaissance. From late Renaissance, we go to early modern, which is that bottom shelf. And it's in that bottom shelf that I showed you, that little brown book, that Book of Mormon. So that was a book I added. I just had to shift books around. And when it came to this second bookshelf here, this one, I wanted to add my modern collection, which starts right around there where you see that tag. That was modern, 1850 to present. I wanted to make sure I included any primary sources and additional works of literature or poetry or whatever that I had purchased along the way. They were sort of stacked up in front of the books, and I didn't like that. So I had to make room. So instead of ending it right around here, I think when I originally did it, I had additional books that covered now this second shelf on into the first few of this shelf here. So that last book that I added was Fahrenheit 451. And then after that, I start going into, what is it, US history. So that's what I had to do. I made room for the moderns, and then I organized US history. Over here, you have the story of us. I have some textbooks. And it continues on this row here, which eventually goes into Latin American history. And then this bottom shelf here is the last of Latin American history. And I have presidents, a few presidents' lives, and then Roman emperors. Over here, I have some California history and just some extra books that I had the space. And I don't want to fill it with anything but American history and anything related to that. So I left it at that. And then when I got to here, this is what I had a lot of additional books on that I just needed to put away in a sensible manner, because I had stacks up on the floor and it annoyed me like crazy. So on this top shelf, I had authors series. So Susan Wise Bauer's books on world history. And after that, I had Thomas Cahill's The Hinges of History. And if you have that one book that says The Founding of Christendom, that's a series as well. I just only have book one. I think that's from a Catholic perspective of world history. Then you have the world history written by H.G. Wells, those two books there. Over here, I have anthologies of primary sources for these three eras in history: Reformation, Nicene Christianity, early Christianity. This series here by Eric Hobsbawm is actually 4 books. I've only have the 3. The last one that I need, I think, is The Age of Radicalism. I believe that's the one. And then after this, I have books about the Middle Ages, starting with that book, The Crusades. So I was able to semi-neatly get those extra books sorted, continued on with books about the Middle Ages until we get to, let's see, the Freemasons, and that starts books about US history. So rather than primary sources and stuff, it's secondary sources and whatnot. So that goes from the 1500s to the 1800s. There's Demon of Unrest, which I talked about in the video. And over here, once I finished that, gosh, it went into, that's about Roosevelt there. Then I have Black Studies. And then I have things about thematic history. So intellectual tradition, conservatism, story of science, story of math, history of each. And then we moved on into monographs. So I keep my monographs here. Then we have books about history, about studying it, about writing about it. And then we get into sociology, topics of sociology. And then down here, I kept books on Europe and the Middle East. And then from there, we moved into politics, political philosophy, political history, and what's this last part? Oh, civics and government. So I have those two books. They're sitting in the dark, poor things. And then we went back over to here, and those first two shelves are all the liberal arts. Different titles. Anything they're related to the liberal arts. Let me pull this. There's that. And this shelf as well. So I realized, wow, I've got a lot of books on the liberal arts. Maybe I should start focusing on other topics. So down here, we have books on literary criticism and writing. And then towards the end, we have books on poetry. And then these last two shelves are anthologies, various topics. And then 3 reference books. That last one there is not a literary reference. It's actually about taking care of the home. But I had an empty space, so that was a great spot for it. And I always refer to it. So, and then this last shelf is a very busy one. See all my little stickies? This is what I had left. So, and here is the combination. It's history. First half is histories, whether it's cultural, history and religion, or politics, justice, equality, all those things. It was a mix. And then once we get to that blue book there, by Chinua Achebe, now we're getting into bios and memoirs. I had a lot of those. I enjoy those. And they go all the way over to this shelf here. There's one of those Civil War journals by Sarah Morgan. I'm going to be adding the one by Mary Chestnut. And then above that, I had an empty space because I didn't want to add another. I wanted just histories and literatures and liberal arts. So there, my Penguin books were put there with my little book nook I made and an old iron. And then here I have my Philip Pullman collection, the last of the Shakespeares. I have my Ignatius Critical Editions, my Shakespeare collection, which of course is incomplete. And then here my anthologies on English literature, American literature, world literature, African American literature, and then some references there. And I kept the top shelf here the same. So my Jane Austen collection and my Philip Pullman folio collection, that stayed there. This area here, let me move the chair. These shelves here are pretty much the same. I really didn't move anything from here. I just have the extra stuff, all those boxes. They're supposed to go neatly in those shelves, but of course those books have to be moved out and put in a different bookshelf before I can put these away. So there's that end. And what else did I do? I took the chair out. I had my big yellow chair in this corner all the time. But in order to, move the books around and organize them, I took the chair out. And I noticed after I took the chair out that this room looked so much bigger. And I could see my books. So I think I'm going to leave the chair out. All I have to deal with now is the leftover stuff. Oh, look, I had to cram so many things into available spaces when I had to put 2 rooms into one. So that is a work in progress. And these, oh goodness, all this center area was supposed to, that's my office. That again was also supposed to be distributed nicely with all this space, and there's that. But this is the leftover, but I'm happy that I got the big stuff done. This of course is all my folios or my special editions, the pricier, the Looky No Touchy books. They're all there. My TBR table. So this is the finished product, minus the little chair, of the library, and my nice little pretty table with the tiles on it, which has been in our family for many years. It looks nice just sitting there in the center of the room with the kitty bed. You got to have the kitty bed. So that's what I ended up with, in a nice little window coming in with the light. That I'm happy with where I am so far. This was the hardest part of it to do. And when I do the next room and get more bookshelves, I'll give you a tour of it then. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out and looking at the tour. I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.